She is a writer, researcher, curator studying histories of photography and notions of the image in contemporary art and curatorial practices. As a programs manager at FICA, Foundation of Indian Contemporary Art, she is committed to creating and activating dynamic spaces and resources for artistic practice, as well as establishing frameworks around art and research, spaces of exhibition, critical writing, editorial, and public programming. So just to tell you a little more about, I mean, of course, Anna's presentation is actually about the Agri Forum, but this was a project that I came across during the pandemic. And in fact, at that point, this was the only interesting project that I sort of had seen in a long time. So this is basically bringing together artists to think about land sustainability and interestingly, the group of artists who've been part of this, at least some of the artists I'm very familiar with, their work is quite outside of the grid of mainstream art practices. And that way, I think this entire project is very interesting. And so when I was thinking about bhini and the curation of this exhibition, this was a project that came to my mind, and I reached out to FICA, and Anna and Vidya immediately responded. And yeah, I'm happy, Anna, that you're here. Thanks.
So, hi everyone. Thank you, Krishnapriya, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity that we got from FICA to also share this exhibition and also travel it to a very new location and to new audiences. So, I'm also very grateful for Anita for having us here. So, it's really been lovely. And I'm also really excited to be here at the symposium because it's been an entire morning of listening to such inspirational work. And just such key findings that I think as someone working with artists, working on the agrarian, it's been really interesting to just be listening in. So I'm also really grateful for the Wendell Berry reference that came up earlier today because I thought I'd start with a poem by Wendell Berry. He's an American poet who writes extensively on ecology and the environment. So to just so the book is titled The Peace of Wild Things, and the poem is also titled The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So to just get started about who I am and the place that I work with, the Foundation for Indian Contemporary Art. So FICA is a non-profit. We're a small non-profit located in Delhi, and we work extensively with contemporary Indian art. We work with artists across various phases in their careers. And for us, our major stakeholder is the art community across South Asia. And over the last 15 to 16 years, FICA has sort of worked with encouraging, promoting, supporting innovative work in the field of art. And we've also worked extensively with collaborations. We're always looking for new opportunities to work with new people, find new audiences, start new dialogues. And our active public programming has been one way for us to do that. So we function out of the FICA Reading Room, which is a library in South Delhi, in Larosarai. And it was basically formed, the reading room was formed with the hope to kind of bring together art publications, books on art, and make them more accessible to students, to artists, anyone actually who'd like to read. And we now have over 5,000 publications in the library. It's an open space. We often function out of there in terms of small exhibitions. And our collection has grown over the years with generous donations from a variety of people and foundations. And we're very, very grateful for all of their help in sort of sustaining the space. So just to give you a very brief insight into what we do, some of our three mainstays in terms of the systems of support that we offer people have been, say, our awards and grants, our exhibition platforms, and the programs that we conduct. The awards and grants actually have been a way for us to connect with artists across phases of their careers, and it's been interesting for us to look at the ways in which art practitioners, creative practitioners are approaching the field of contemporary art today. We work with people right out of college. We work with people who've had a little bit more experience, a little bit more visibility, and at the same time we also have fostered visual arts research in the field. So these have been, I think, our four mainstays in terms of the grants. We're always thinking about new ones, and our most recent grant was the Himalayan Fellowship in collaboration with Royal Enfield that we instituted, supporting practitioners who would be working with ecology and environment in the Himalayas, with a focus on intangible cultural heritage, areas that really are really the theme of the hour. And moving forward, our exhibitions have actually been a way for us to embrace a very nomadic style of exhibition making, and we've always tried to gear ourselves towards more participatory spaces, very energetic forums where people can kind of come in and think with us as alongside the works themselves. And we've worked extensively with the Students' Biennale, for instance, in Kochi. We've also worked with Serendipity Arts Festival, and these have just been a few examples. So just some images from some of our programs. In terms of the ways in which we constantly remain in conversation with our audiences, who are actually key stakeholders for us, we enjoy an active year-long public program, and some of which is conducted out of our space in the reading room. And we've had to experiment with the virtual as well with the lockdown, and it's been interesting to kind of connect to audiences outside of our immediate sphere in Delhi. And we've sort of also, I think, continued to shape our programs around pedagogies and ways of learning and ways of sort of activating key questions in the field. Most recently, last year, we really interrogated the idea of public art. So we worked with public art practitioners and people writing about public art to kind of bridge the gap between what it is that the public space is offering to such creative practices. Things that, also this is an image from the top left image is Krishnapriya's workshop that she did with us in FICA, and another example of fantastic collaboration that we've had. So our work has remained, I think, on really trying to strengthen the art community and with a special focus on young practitioners. So especially because terms such as artistic research, the idea of the processual have really taken center stage. And it's been really important for us to also find ways in which our forums and platforms can not only just cater to them, but also be in conversation with them constantly and really try and evolve as time evolves, as questions evolve. So the AgriForum was a recent example of a program that we started for a group of artists working with the agrarian. It became about bringing people together in the middle of the lockdown in 2021. And we started it as a reading group. And it brought together people who have been sort of really engaged with creative expressions with the field, quite literally, working with the agrarian. A lot of them actually work with the ground. They farm, they have different initiatives that they run with farming communities, and they are artists in their own right. So the AgriForum has been a way since October 2021, and we started it as a reading group, a virtual reading group, which met I think thrice or twice a month on Zoom, which meant navigating really difficult internet connections, the gray screen of the Zoom that we all became very familiar with. But it also became a way for us to just gather and to really think about interconnections that were arising between these practices that were otherwise functioning in smaller silos. And it became really important for a lot of the practitioners and for us as sort of listeners and facilitators to realize that there were a lot of convergences that were occurring, a lot of questions that were being asked in very similar ways, in very similar frameworks. And the forum and the people that it brought together became a way of convergence, a way to also amplify macro socio-political, cultural issues that were playing out at a very micro level as well for each of our artists that we worked with. And the reading group, as this very, with a very bare bones agenda, we were keen to sort of create a space that would assimilate these different sources, archives, responses, just ways of thinking that these people were also bringing to us, bringing to each other, and the potential of possible collaborations that could occur. So the act of reading for us, and we started with a very small reading list. We started with excerpts, we started with quotations, we started with poems. It grew to a very big resource of people wanting to know more about different themes, picking up on what the other person was kind of hinting at, thematics and ideas, and that kind of led to this building of a larger resource pool as well. So it became, I think, so in thinking about and through around the agrarian as a site and this, ever expanding concept, and as a material and as a medium, we were really really wanting to convene in a way that would then allow us to ask, what does it mean to really read a landscape, and what does it really mean to belong to it? And why is it that people are asking these questions? Why is it that creative practice actually today, contemporary art, is really trying hard to ask these questions in different ways through different mediums? And by reading the agrarian, it meant that even through the group that we kept exploring this word, this act of reading together, that we were also reading across languages, we were reading within languages, we were reading, paying a close attention to the kind of words people were using, the kind of things that were happening, translations, and how our relationships with land, landscapes, ideas of belonging were also growing and shifting each time. And so reading with the AgriForum occurred through a variety of ways. It occurred through, and it also kind of, it started with these very, this scattered, I think, body of lenses, these little nodes that came up, notions of community, the intertwining of, say, ecologies and ecosystems, the way we think around invasions and intrusions and presences in a certain way, coexistences. Vocabularies became a big deal because I think people were also sharing what something was called in one language, trying to find a way to mediate it for another person's experience. The urgencies of climate change and adaptability, how land, water, soil, seeds, each element was also responding very differently to shifts in climate. And of course, the question of sustainability, resilience, and eventually, of course, the thing that was also tying a lot of these practices together were these material explorations, were thinking with mediums, across mediums, and ways of really sort of activating their own creative practices. So I'd like to also now introduce the artists that we worked with. It was a small group to begin with, and our conversations are still sort of ongoing. So it's been interesting to kind of work with this initial group. So the Anga Art Collective is a group from Assam. They've been working extensively with the landscape. Some of the members are in Bihar and Assam. They sort of straddle both these areas. And they've really been working with ecology and art in the region. Blaise Joseph is an educator based in Kerala. He's also been recently returned to farming in his ancestral lands. Gopa is an artist from Tripura whose village lies in the no man's land next to the India-Bangladesh border. So her work has really explored what it means to sort of inhabit that kind of a space that often doesn't find space on a map. Gyanwant is from Pratapgarh in Uttar Pradesh. He's been sort of exploring the nature of the landscape, questions of caste, questions of research in a landscape like that. And he's also very interested in residue and traces of agricultural work. Arun Kumar is an artist from Maharashtra. He also runs the Sara initiative. CF John is a senior artist from Kerala, currently based in Bangalore, who's also been farming extensively. Rashmi and Sujit are both Delhi-based artists, and Sujit and Rashmi are both urban farmers in their own right. Sujit has a farm in Ghaziabad, and he's been sort of experimenting with different ways of organic farming through that, different ways of also dissemination, working with the local markets, and he's also been dealing a lot with moving against conventions in and around farming in the area. Rashmi has a Farm 8, which is an urban farm working with permaculture in the heart of the city, actually. Ankan is an artist from Assam as well, and he's been sort of looking at his immediate environment. He has a sculptural practice actually, but also a very publicly situated practice where he works with public spaces, and has been really questioning. He's been also dealing with the aftermath of floods in the area and sort of really trying to process his reflections around the same. Umesh is an artist from Bihar who's been working with, who's actually someone who's been working with seed conservation and the farmers' protests. Gram Art Project is a collective from Parad Singha in MP, and they've been working. It was founded, I think, by Shweta Bhattad, and it's now sort of graduated to being a community art project, a community project in the village, working with organic farming, paper making, seed conservation, working also against domestic violence, eco-sanitation in the area. And Maqsood is an artist from Shantiniketan in West Bengal, and he's been sort of working with contamination, rot, fungi, and the ways in which we also deal with decay and death in a very different way. So this was a very sparse introduction to all their really fantastic practices. So something that we had also tried to do with the AgriForum when it was a reading group was that we wanted to create a slightly less transient mode of documentation and some kind of a recording that would remain. So we started creating this little blog that coexisted with the reading group, and it sort of and the annotations, as this section shows, became our blog, where we kind of brought together these different sections that were recording the things that everyone was sharing. So preoccupations, for instance, was something that we started with an exercise with everybody, that what are you currently preoccupied with, what's on your mind right now, and then that eventually led to we came back to it towards the end of the reading group to kind of look how far we'd come, and also go back to the initial questions and see how they might have evolved. Mapping practices was a way for us to kind of look at the ways in which people were also reading their own sites, the ways in which sites were also unfolding over time, and the ways in which also we could be introduced, sitting in our different areas, to the expanse at a very ground level, at a level of the ground itself. Field notes was self-explanatory, and it was really exciting for us to also collect and look at a lot of the sketchbooks, journals, notes from the field that were coming across to us. And transmissions became a very experimental section for us, which had one great output, which was the tool book, which is on display here as well, which was undertaken by one of the artists, Gopa, because tools became a key theme that everybody was converging around. It became a point of conversation and a way for everyone to kind of connect with each other, share the kind of tools they were working with. And Gopa is someone who works with paper making, so she makes paper out of organic residue, organic matter, such as leaves and hay, etc. And she sort of made these different sheets of paper, which she sent across to everybody, and everyone kind of responded on the paper and sent it back to her. So then it all came together in the form of the tool book, which is currently on display here. So as we kind of worked with these key themes and these lenses that we started with, like I mentioned, there were these convergences that were happening that we could kind of really identify, and we really wanted to build on further. And that was also giving us a way to think about modes of collaboration that we could really foster and really be privy to in that way. And one of the key thematics were soil, seeds, and stories. So the idea that relationships with and to soil were really important. And this came up through a variety of readings, through a variety of conversations, people sharing different ideas, how they were mobilizing their own resources in different ways. So one of the key areas that soil began to be activated was around the idea of tools. So tools as social agents almost, not just as dead objects. They became social agents as part of these conversations. And it started conveying a nature of the field in a very different light. Also, it allowed, I think, all our artists to kind of look at these changing relations to tools, to natures of production, to interdependencies between various species, the kind of tools that are used across seasons. So Umesh and Gyan, both of them also worked with, also were collecting tools in their various villages, tools and tool design that was actually going out of sort of fashion, with people working with more contemporary designs. And so they were also looking at, I think Gyan had found a researcher in his own village who had been sort of hoarding these tools at his hand, so that someone somewhere could create some kind of a database around these designs, around these forms. And so tools as physical and social agents became this way for us to also think about both the human and the more than human. Sujit is someone who has a very interesting practice, and he'd been doing a lot. He does a lot of experiments on ground at his field at his farm in Ghaziabad. So something that he was working with was the layer of peat that forms on the ground after it rains, and then when it dries, the ground cracks. So what he was doing is he was collecting these peat samples and baking them. And after baking them, what he was able to do is look at the traces that different life forms were leaving on the soil. So it became a way for him to kind of take us through, he would be able to identify which worm, which bug had moved where. If a goat had come in contact with a particular bird, you could see these footprints. And it was really exciting for us to kind of look at the kind of work that he was doing. So this became a very participatory element at our display when we first shown the Agri Forum. Umesh, like I mentioned, has been working extensively with seed conservation and just collecting seeds, documenting them, also raising awareness around the different kinds of seeds that grow in his area. Also, he's currently studying it at Banaras Hindu University, so he's been working with seeds in that area too. And this form that he developed with us for the initial display, the first iteration of the Agri Forum that we did, was this kotila. It's actually a form of storing usually rice for long times. And Umesh is from the Bhojpur region in Bihar, and he was inspired by his mother's, mostly it's something that women deal with on a large basis in terms of this act of storing and preserving and keeping for posterity. So he kind of adapted that shape to host his different seeds and the different kinds of documentations that he was doing around seeds. So this was a very interesting form that arrived out of it. So questions about climate were of course very central, and this whole idea of, I think, the realities of living and battling unpredictability, precarity, changing patterns across wind, air, soil, and water. This became something that was also questioned across various practices. So, for instance, Gopa had looked at, she had shared about this disaster that had occurred in a natural disaster that had occurred in her village, which had sort of, and she shared these videos with us of how, in the aftermath, it was actually the aftermath of a disaster, and these were some of her field notes from that time. Maqsood had been studying wetlands in Kolkata, so he'd shared some of his insights on the same. Anga is a collective, as I said, based out of Assam, and they'd basically been looking at the human-elephant relations in this region, in the Patgaon region. And it became really interesting because they were also looking at these different forms of pedagogic insertions in the area, with deep walks into the forest, listening, and they were also, I think, trying to understand the relationship that exists between the villagers and the elephants who come in search of food. So often the villagers aren't really in favor of hurting the animals, but it does become necessary for self-defense. So they were also part of these negotiations that were taking place in a variety of ways. And one of our, I think, key areas that did really come out were this I think the question of growing, nurturing, and preserving, and relationships to land and the ways in which we derive from it and also give back to it. So I think Sujit, this is Sujit. Sujit has a farm and a collective that he works out of in Ghaziabad. So he shared a lot about his experiments with working in the region, working with also sort of destabilizing inherited conventions around farming, around minimal waste. So this is also like an experimental project for him. Gram Art Project in Parad Singha had shared about their experiments with intercropping, both edible and non-edible plants. They also shared about how they were working with live fences with cacti and sagar gota, both of which are really useful plants in the area, because they support new plantations. And they also shared about how their work with a local community, the Dhimars in the area, who are really a depleting resource for indigenous knowledge. And it became really important for them to try and learn from the community. But then also they got inducted into a way of sort of planting and farming that was taught to them by the Dhimars. So I think all of these kind of tangents would also often return to this larger question of what is it the agrarian comes to be when we talk about art or artistic practice. And it also became, I think the forum became this way for everyone to kind of share the processes that they were trying, that they were experimenting with. And so I also put in a few images of some of the work that came out. For instance, Gram Art Projects, Eaton Cotton, a book which is also on display here. It's a screen printed book which was made in limited edition in collaboration with women in the area, and it also follows the story of BT cotton, which is cultivated in the area. And it looks at the adverse impacts of BT cotton on the ecosystem there. It looked at, and also because there is an active paper making unit, so they were really, it's a beautiful book that comes together addressing the different things that Gram Art really tries to do. These were images from Maqsood's field journals. Maqsood sort of works with deep observations on the field, and he's someone who observes fungal life very closely. So his idea is also to move away from sterilization, moving away from very sterilized ways of looking at art practice, looking at ecosystems, because often decay is often sidelined when we think around an ecosystem. And so for him, fungi, or this idea of decay, and becomes more than just an aesthetic. It's also something that he really enjoys experimenting with. So these were just images from his journal. Gopa, she's someone who has an exceptional paper making practice. So she made these out of sugarcane pulp, and these were small bodies of work that she created. Ankan is from Shiv Sagar in Assam, and the bandh, or the embankment in the area, is a key, I think, motive for him to work with, because it symbolizes a certain life and death situation in terms of the collapse of certain I think facilities, also the collapse of this entire the ecosystem that it also creates in its own way. And the bandh has this very functional, non-functional I think life in that area, and Ankan's predilections with it have been around for a while. And this is an image in a work from 2019 actually, and his inquiries into the bandh have continued since, and Krishnapriya was a key part of this exhibition when Ankan had shown it. And so Gyanwant, working in Uttar Pradesh, was actually is someone who works with residues. So he kind of created this very textural map of his village on a wall during our first display of the Agri Forum. And for him, this was also a way to think around mappings and think around viewings. Also, the ways in which we think around, I think, looking closely, looking from afar. So he really experiments with the ways in which he uses material. And Gyan has also been thinking a lot about caste and caste divisions in the village. I think this work also led to further dialogues around the same. So entering, I think, the last phase of this presentation, Many Acts of Reading was the first time that we cited it was at the Vadera Art Gallery in Delhi, which is a contemporary art space. And for us, it was important to kind of find a way to showcase our findings, our research, and I think all of the thoughts and reflections from the artists and the participants in a way that would not create it in a very sanitized space, because it was also a way for us to be in dialogue with the space of the gallery. So Many Acts of Reading took shape as a reading room of sorts, and this became a way for us to kind of collate a public-facing forum for the Agri Forum, which was otherwise a closed-door reading group. And it became a way for us to invite some really interesting interlocutions, mediations, audiences into the fray. And it really started with some key questions. For instance, this wall was just also a lot of the reading group eventually was spanning Zoom and WhatsApp, because those were our platforms that were available to us. So all the images on the wall were WhatsApp images, and even the reflections, the conversations came out of just WhatsApp messages that people were sharing with each other. So we sort of collated this wall to look at just the idea of a field, just the ways in which people were looking or reading the field. It was a very active reading space, so we were also thinking with ways in which people could read in the space, could work in the space, could also co-reflect with us. And it was also, I think, an evolving space. It was something that took shape very spontaneously and through documents, through very, very fleeting ways of, I think, compiling, assimilation. So these were all just, I think, words and keywords for us as we were exploring this. As I said, reading was the key part of the space, and these were a number of books from Anga Art Collective, and they have this initiative of theirs called the No School, KNOW, and they're working with schools and actually post-school education in Assam, and especially in remote villages, and kind of really looking at how ways of learning can be activated very differently to systematized school curriculums. And so we had visitors really take apart a lot of these books in very different ways, and that was actually the idea behind it. And so this was where Sujit's peat samples were on display. We also put in a lot of poetry in the space, a lot of videos, a lot of conversations. So it almost felt like you were in the midst of a conversation with everyone who was thinking with you. Tools was, like I said, a really important part for us to think with. And while we couldn't, of course, travel the tools here, the actual tools themselves, this wall became a really interesting way for people to converge and talk about. We had people come in and talk about how they hadn't seen a certain kind of tool in a while. And the shoes at the bottom are actually something that Sujit had created. He calls them his moonwalk shoes. Basically, it allows you to kind of wear them, and if you walk on any kind of soil, it's a different way of feeling the soil or reading the soil, if you will. So your feet kind of sink in and out of it. So he lent us a pair for the exhibition. And I think it was also a way for us to experiment with very different media all at once, all at the same time. We had audio devices, we had people listening to things, and I think we also tried to recreate that here, just to kind of travel a sense of what it was like for us also, I think, listening in to a lot of the conversations that people were having. So with a number of works, actually, indigenous knowledge or traditional ways of farming, traditional ways of being with the soil, being with the land, was something that really came through, and it came through in very, I think, in ways that we weren't expecting. So it also became a way for people to start approaching this idea of conservation in new ways. And I think things that they sort of self-initiated among themselves. This was Umesh's little kotila that he had brought in. It was a portable form that he'd done with us for the exhibition. And so something that kind of we started with was the idea of gathering. It was gathering in the midst of a lockdown, gathering in the midst of a period of serious isolation. But it was also something that we were left with. It was also something that we culminated the reading group with, culminated our first iterations of the Agri Forum with. And the idea of also, I think, growing, of how each one of us and each one of us in the forum, all the participants were very keenly associating themselves with or as growers. And that became really that became some key food for thought for us. And so what we, I think, look forward to this iteration here at DakshinaChitra was really wonderful for us to also experiment with. And we never realized this could be a traveling exhibition. This could be something that could move to new sites. And we were really excited at the prospect of it. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And what we hope for is that we also return to the site, return to so many of our participants and their sites, and to invite new participants into the forum too, because a lot of the questions that we have, I think, collected over the past couple of years have been things that people have also passed on to others. So on that note, I'd like to end with another poem by Wendell Berry, this time one of his Sabbath poems, and I'd like to sort of finish that. I go among trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them asleep like cattle. Then what is afraid of me comes and lives a while in my sight. What it fears in me leaves me, and the fear of me leaves it. It sings and I hear its song. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves it, and the fear of it leaves me. It sings and I hear its song. After days of labor, mute in my consternations, I hear my song at last and I sing it. As we sing, the day turns, the trees move. Thank you. So a lot of the practitioners that we invited to join the forum were people that had collaborated with FICA at different points, or were also recipients of some of our systems of support. And Vidya, in fact, the director of FICA, had been in conversation with them for a while. So Gram Art Project, for instance, had received the public art grant, I think in 2014 or 16, one of the years. So their work had been something that we were very closely aware of. Ankan had been part of, say, a few of our programs previously, and he'd been exploring this theme of the bun, this idea of the agrarian in his practice. Anga as well has been, I think, a collective that we've been very closely associated with. So these were people that we sort of met through the art community, through some of our systems of support, through the grants, through workshops, residencies, and I think the seed, pun not intended, was, I think, planted, I think, through the conversations that Vidya was having, that we were also being privy to as they were. And then it kind of became, oh, this person's asking this kind of a question. It would be really nice if they knew that so-and-so was asking it too. So it kind of became about wanting to connect, wanting to facilitate a kind of forum for them to think through the agrarian, because I think otherwise it was becoming, we felt that somewhere these were smaller silos in which people were thinking around these questions that were, I think, applicable to so many of them at one go. So it just so happened, I think, maybe if it hadn't been for a lockdown, it may have unfolded differently, maybe with a more physical meetup initially, but then the reading group took shape quite literally, because we were also experimenting with a reading group separately, like just an online reading group that we were hosting on Instagram Live and everything, just around books on art, etc., from the library itself. And then it kind of, that just went forward. What if we try a reading group around the agrarian, just as a way to take these conversations forward?
I think what I'm curious about is, the process of curating an exhibition like this, and sort of coming in as someone who mediates this whole process, where, of course, a lot of the artists that you probably sort of just briefly showed us, their practices are more than just a practice, but it's really their lives also. I mean, these are people who are farming, they're living, in the land that they're thinking about, and so in many ways, I mean, for me personally, also having had a long-term relationship with Marudam, for example, I know there are a lot of creative people there, but so practices are very much within these communities, within people who are, I mean, in fact, a lot of them probably don't even recognize themselves as artists in that sense. So then when thinking about bringing it to audiences, and that's where I feel, an exhibition or the act of curation itself sort of comes alive. So what was this process for you?
Yeah, no. So thank you. I think it's so. I think one of the first thing that comes to mind is also like we when we first did this at Vadera Art Gallery, it also arose out of a way of thinking. Okay, we have all this material on our hands that had been garnered through, say, the WhatsApp group, and it was just a way to also find some kind of okay, if we have to share this, how do we share it? So we went back and forth on ideas of publication, of okay, what if we go live with the blog? What if we do some kind of create a different kind of, I think, mode of sharing outside of the group itself? And then this space was made available, and we thought, okay, maybe we do something that would bring alive some of these. And a lot of I think the material were these documents. They were, the objects came much later. A lot of these were just images and text. So I think for us, it became about, okay, then we don't call this a display, we call it a reading room. So it stayed with that idea of the reading group moving to a reading room. So there's now a space for other people to read with us, with everyone and the reflections that they were sharing. So I think in terms of the curation here, and I think some of the broad themes I think still remained, was a way I think we were still thinking with these convergences, these points that everyone somewhere had intersected with each other. So tools was, I think, a big inquiry. For instance, tools became something that everyone was asking. So thematically speaking, we were like, okay, one area could really be devoted to the reflections on tools, and they were just really wonderful notes that people had shared. And we had, so on board we also had Stuti Bhavsar, who was our sort of our coordinator for the forum, and she had it was her, I think, note taking that had brought out this idea of the tool as a social agent. Everybody was obviously talking about it, but it was, I think, she put it into a particular phrase that really caught on, and then everyone started thinking through that lens. So the tool section was such. Seeds was definitely something that we wanted to, I think, build on. So the display, I think, took shape thematically in a way around a lot of these points of encounter and I think convergence and sharing that had come through a lot of people. So I think Gopa's work is this one. The paper, the border trail that she had done, and so the borders are something that she'd been working with. So we also wanted to, I think, move away from the art object on a pedestal mode of viewing this kind of, I think, these reflections, because I think we all felt that maybe that may take away from the non-sanctity of a lot of these things. It was all about, I think, getting, and rightly, like you said, like these aren't practices in a way that they're separate from the way they live their life. It's very much a way of life for each one of them. So it became, I think, also a way for us to think about how do we blur that boundary of simply presenting reflections. What happens with the walls? What happens with the more logistical parts of the display as well? So it was interesting for us to kind of also position a lot of the reading material alongside some of the works. Have different kinds of, I think, mediums intersect. So we had audio, we had visual, we had some tactile elements, we had things you could take away. And I think so. Another, I think, interesting part was also, so we didn't put up any, I think, wall texts in terms of about each person's work. We had one main, I think, introduction to the entire forum I think on this side of the wall. But what had also come through the forum were these smaller words and vocabularies that we had collected. So we started inserting those, we started inserting phrases that people had shared, we put in poetry, we put in these different prompts, and I think that people had given us, given the group, given as, I think, food for thought for everybody. So it kind of became like, those became like our little markers of distinction. That, so I think on the extreme right here, there was an entire section around the river. Like there were these riverine explorations that the group was really taking forward. So Blaze was looking at the river, and a member of the Anga Art Collective was looking at the river, and somebody else was looking at constellations in the sky that affect a certain the way in which a river is read or it moves. And so we started looking, okay, these are some commonalities that thematically might come together, but we tried to keep it as, I think, free flowing a space, a way in which I think a lot of the themes also spoke to each other in a way. And I think it was interesting for us to also begin with just images and text. So it became like this long line of conversation, which this one, like just sort of, these were just images and excerpts that people had written in, sharing images from the field. Like for instance, this was Gopa's images around the natural disaster that took place near her village in Tripura. Umesh was also following the river, for instance. And Dharmendra Prasad, an artist from Assam, from Anga Art Collective, had been following this one very specific wetland lake area in Assam, the Deepor Beel, and he'd been looking at the communities that were fishing there. So it became these little nodes of ways of thinking with the field. So I think that was, I don't know if I answered your question very well, but that was a mapping of how we thought of the display.